It's often heard that Japan as a country has observed critically low birth rates. Birth rates that the country has worked hard to attempt in raising. But did you know Japan once saw a time in history with extremely high birth rates? What's defined as a rather sad time in Japanese history? Today I bring you an unusual topic, though that doesn't make it any less important. It's a serious issue in Japan that somehow spawned a creepypasta out of it, and a Vocaloid song. More than one character within the Yakuza games have been inspired by these incidents. Beyond that, coming-of-age novels have been written about children who survived and carried the trauma associated with these horrific incidents. The topic of coin locker babies is one that is well known throughout Japan and has had a tremendous impact on popular culture. And in this video, we're going to talk about it. Showa-era Japan is a time period in history that's often romanticized as well as appreciated for its aesthetic. Between city pop, Showa idols, a simpler way of life, and just the general feel of that era in Japan, I can see why. However, what people don't typically discuss are the darker elements of it. There were clashing political views between generations, higher crime rates, and today's topic. This form of child abandonment first emerged in the decades following post-war Japan, primarily in the 1970s and 80s. In Japan, in train stations and the areas nearby them, there exist these temporary lockers, referred to as coin-operated lockers. These lockers are often used to store luggage, groceries, or anything you don't want to carry around with you while you're out and about town. It's a convenient service that works well with the Japanese city lifestyle of train commutes and constant walking. You simply pay for the duration of time you want the locker for. However, some women in Showa-era Japan saw this as a grim opportunity, for it's the nature of these lockers, the short-term period in which they're used, where many assume that they would be checked frequently by other people as well as train station attendants. This gave way to a use that was not foreseen in the slightest. For these lockers started being used as a means to abandon newly born infants. These infants were just left here. Both babies who are alive and those who did not make it. Because these infants are left here when nobody's around to see who did it, they were often not discovered in time. The coin lockers, depending on area, are not checked as frequently as one may assume. Some of these victims are not discovered until days, weeks, or months later. And as time went on, these occurrences became more and more frequent, observed as a serious epidemic in highly populated cities like Tokyo and Osaka. These coin locker babies continue to be discovered routinely well into the 1990s. Now, many of you out there are likely wondering how somebody could possibly do this, let alone fathom the thought. There are a number of reasons that are attributed to these incidents, though every case is different. Unfortunately, societal and economic reasons are often to blame. Single pregnant women in Japan are often faced with a lot of negativity. The topic of intercourse in itself is often hushed and not discussed, to the point that it's seen as a taboo in everyday life, or simply too private a matter to speak to somebody about. A single pregnant mother has potential to be scrutinized and shunned. This could lead to isolation. Medical procedures to terminate a pregnancy have been equally scrutinized. And if the mother is still just a teen or older and unmarried, further scrutiny is possible. The option of termination is legal in Japan, however does require the consent of the father in order to proceed in most cases. If the pregnancy is a secret, this could lead to further reluctancy. Historically, women have earned less income than men. This complicates the situation of a single mother even further. In short, a combination of traditional expectations, commonly perceived taboos, and lack of financial stability can lead to the isolation of the expecting mother. While each of these tragic situations are different, this isolation is sadly what could lead to these horrible coin locker incidents. Now, there is somewhat of a silver lining in regards to all this. The surge in coin locker baby discoveries eventually made way for laws and certain things to be put in place to prevent these issues or rectify them in some way. Safe haven laws are in place in many parts of the world. These are laws that allow mothers to anonymously leave children in safe places like hospitals and fire stations. The areas created to place the babies are heated and secure. Medical attention is alerted to come to the hatch if it's opened and activated. It was in the year 2007 when Japan created its own baby hatch system known as the White Stork's Cradle. It has saved the lives of 155 babies thus far. However, the very first actions taken were in the 1980s. Coin lockers were physically moved to more populated areas and became supervised at all times. Uma Nibu, a women's liberation movement, brought forth the issue of taboo and the scrutiny of the mothers themselves as well. It was in 1993 that rules were put in place that addressed each situation differently, depending on the age of the infant and whether or not they were alive when born. Different situations received different charges. Options in birth control became more prominent as well. AC Japan started airing various PSAs to educate both men and women on this topic. And currently, decades later, Japan is observing record lows in the birth rate itself. In 2022, it reached an all-new record low and has been dropping significantly each year for the past 7 years. And the reasons associated with the shrinking Japanese populace are very similar to the reasons behind those coin locker baby incidents all those decades ago. Those still being taboo, cultural expectations, and financial limitations. In modern times, the tragic discoveries of coin locker babies have decreased significantly. It still does happen, though when they do, they're often news headlines and not something that's commonly seen. In the past 20 years, there have been only 3 publicized big incidents involving coin locker babies. In short, this epidemic is a thing of the past and rarely occurs nowadays, though it now remains one of the darker attributes of a time in Japan that has long passed. The effects and remnants of this still remain in the media, though, most prominently from a well-known Vocaloid song and a creepypasta that made its way onto Japanese forums. The song is titled Coin Locker Baby, and it's by an artist known as Maretu. It was created with the Hatsune Miku Vocaloid software and tells a rather unpleasant story. One easily concealed by a rather upbeat song. The speaker talks about building up the result of a non-existent secret between themselves and someone they loved but were heartbroken by. What they were building up was a pregnancy. They then placed the baby into a locker as the baby reminded them of the person who broke their heart. What follows is a toxic on and off relationship the speaker continues with the father and later other men. This causes more hardship and more pregnancies that end in tragedy. This girl becomes more and more regretful as the song goes on, carrying the trauma and remorse she eventually comes to feel as she plans to stop when she has a baby that she determines as perfect. There was once a girl who was lonely and lacked family structure. She was also recently heartbroken for the very first time by her first love who simply used her and discarded her when he got bored. The girl clung to this man and relied on him for emotional support. She was never truly loved before and yearned for it beyond anything else in this world. The man who broke her heart was an older man whom she looked up to. She longed to grow up and become a woman to be a part of his world. But these hopes were naively made. Later on, the girl found out she was pregnant, and this made her very, very scared. The only action she took upon realizing her pregnancy was to just ignore it. Being young and naive, she just hoped it would go away. Though, as her child grew and she became larger, she went to meet with the man who broke her heart and explained the whole situation. Still desperately holding on to some kind of hope in being with him and having a family, and ultimately finding happiness in that. The man, however, shoved her away and responded with nothing short of disgust. He looked at her with an empty expression and simply said he did not care, that their child was solely her problem. And when the time came finally for her to give birth, the baby was alive and healthy. Strangely calm, not crying or uttering any sound, yet calmly staring at her. Making eye contact with her child for the very first time, she felt overwhelmed. Weak and still in pain from what she just experienced, she panicked further, picking herself up and rushing to the nearest train station. As she placed the baby into that cold, small locker, she saw him open his eyes and look to her once again, making no sound. It felt as though he was almost judging her. She panicked further, slammed the door shut, and ran away, telling herself over and over that someone would find him and that he would be okay. As the days and weeks passed by, as she passed the locker each day on her way to school, she noticed that the locker remained closed still. At this point, she expected it to be eventually opened and covered with yellow tape, showing the finality of her actions, but that day never came. Eventually, those months turned into years, and the girl was now a woman, engaged to a man that loved her and treated her very well. She was pregnant once again, 7 months along, and happy to have the family she always yearned for. It was late one night when she walked through that very same station, on her way home after her final day of work before her maternity leave. It was within this station that she witnessed a boy in red overalls, pacing frantically back and forth and wailing. Her maternal instinct appeared to kick in, and the woman was rushed to the boy without thinking. As she did, the hall began to darken and grow cold. She bent down to meet his gaze and stopped him from pacing. The boy refused to look up at her. He only looked downward at the floor. "Are you all right? Where is your mother?" she asked. After an almost eternal pause, the boy finally looked up to her and responded. That's when she realized it. That gaze, the gaze belonging to this boy, was the very same one she witnessed all those years ago. For it was the very same gaze as the baby she abandoned. Feeling that very same state of panic, she didn't even hear him respond. When he said, "It's you." The very next morning, the station staff discovered a disturbing sight. A trail of fluids leading into one of the coin lockers. Within the locker and surrounding door of it, there was a series of handprints belonging to a child. Small and varying in size, it could have been multiple children. No bodies were ever found. And that's the tale of the Coin Locker Baby creepypasta. While the identity of the author is unknown, the story almost feels like a warning. Perhaps warning others to not make the same decisions the mothers of the Coin Locker babies have in the past. In conclusion, this is a very heavy topic with a lot of other heavy topics associated with it. Despite that, I feel like it's a very important topic and element of Japanese history that should be discussed. One thing I've always wanted to do with this channel is look at both the good and bad of Japan from an unbiased perspective. Japan has a lot of good, but there are some darker elements that aren't really discussed. With all of that said, I sincerely hope you guys found this video informative and enlightening for that reason. Anyways, that's all for today, and I will see you in the next video.